The new theater of the mind. The Bruce Collins Show.
Welcome back to the Bruce Collins Show. We're very glad to have you join us. The Bruce Collins Show airs every Friday night at midnight right here at WWPR 1490 AM. You can listen to past archives of the Bruce Collins Show at fringeradionetwork.com. That's fringeradionetwork.com. There's a tab just for the Bruce Collins Show on the Fringe Radio Network website. We would appreciate it if you're able to spread the word for our show by word of mouth, social media, or in whatever creative way you can. Also, we have a Facebook page for the Bruce Collins Show. Please like us there, and we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at Bruce_Collins_show at AOL.com. And joining me this week it's my honor to welcome Mark Breton. Mark Breton is somewhat of a co-host on a podcast known as The Iron Show with Johnny McMahon, and you can find out more information about The Iron Show at fringeradionetwork.com, which is also where the Bruce Collins Show archives are. Now, Mark Breton has been married for 28 years to Jennifer, his wife, and he has 3 adult children, all believers. He's currently the pastor of a new fellowship, a church plant. We'll talk about that in a second. And he has a Master of Arts in Religion with a major in Pastoral Counseling and a major of Divinity majoring in Discipleship Studies. He's been a believer for 38 years, and he's been involved in ministry for more than 30 years. He's been a worship leader, a counselor, an event speaker, a preacher, and a Christian recording artist, and we're going to find out about that too. Doing concerts and preaching for over 30 years. He currently lives outside of Nashville, where, of course, he has his church plant. And as I said before, he's somewhat of a co-host for Johnny McMahon on The Iron Show. And I won't even try to say what's up, which is what they normally say there.
We'll do the Bruce Collins version of what's up.
Yeah. Mine is more of the conservative, I guess, type. Now, Mark, welcome to the program. Let's talk first about your pastoring. How did this come about? Because I think when I first met you, you were not pastoring a church.
No, I was not. I have been teaching at Calvary Chapel Rivergate in Goodlettsville, north of Nashville, for 6 years, college and career, and then just a topical study every Wednesday night. And I did ministry, and I went to visit people that were in the hospital and things like that. But I was never brought on staff. And then the Lord finally, through all the different circumstances that occur in a church and in your own life, is like, all right, it's time for you finally to come on and it's time for you to do what you need to do now. You're finally at that point. And the backstory is huge, but suffice it to say, when I was 12 years old, I was called into ministry to be a minister, and I didn't know what that would look like. I just knew I wanted to help people and that I loved the Lord. And it was just such an incredible experience. I had an Isaiah moment, where the presence of God is so real that you just break down. You're like, why me, Lord? And if people ever want an indicator of if they're actually hearing from God, one of the first things that'll pop in their head is, why me, Lord? I grew up in a severely abusive home. If anybody's ever listened to Johnny or on the Iron Show, we've talked about it a lot. And I basically, when I was 18, I just took the reins. I was like, Lord, this has been cool and all, but I'm going to do my own thing for a while. But I had another Isaiah moment when I was 25, and my marriage was really strained, and I didn't know it at the time. I was bipolar, and so it's just, you don't have the insight you need to be a really a thoughtful person in a way that you can be in a relationship like that and do it well. And so I was kind of a vortex in the life of my family. But the Lord came right down and again, just pinged me hard and said, this is your calling. And he said, feed my sheep. And I was like, wow, and I'm sitting in the back of this church and everybody's just happy and it's a great time. And I'm bawling my eyes out because I had an experience with God. And anytime I'm really truly in the presence of God, I mean, it almost brings me to tears because he is so incredible and I'm not. Yeah. And I'm so happy about that.
Can I ask you something real quick about your youth? And It seems to be an interesting answer that many Christians have, and see if you agree with this. When a lot of people are young, and maybe they were saved young, they maybe experience tough times with their family, like you were talking about, an abusive family. And the Christian answer is always, that's Satan trying to derail you from living for God because God has plans for you later. Do you think that's true?
I think that, I'll tell you what I think the devil is trying to get at me specifically with. But I will always put, almost all the time, the evil that human beings do on the human beings that do it. My mother she was crazy, she was vicious, and my brothers and I, we just endured it until we could get out of the house. And so I really think that she was just awful. Do I think that the enemy would capitalize on that? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to share something with you I haven't even talked about on Johnny's show. It was really weird. I'm an extremely heterosexual man. I've never had any issues with that. I just don't even think about it. But when I was young, I was a small guy, curly hair, just a happy-go-lucky sort of dude in a lot of ways. And I was getting hit on by homosexual men. And it was really weird, dude. I mean, it wasn't like all the time, but I think that was definitely the devil. I definitely think that was Satan. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't because I would be tempted by it. It's like one of these guys could very well have just grabbed me and done whatever, if the situation had allowed it to occur. But I think that the devil was gunning for me, because if I could have... See, I was never sexually abused. Mm-hmm. But if he could have pulled that off, that wrecked me. That would have been really horrible.
Yeah.
So there's a weird detour.
You spent a long time being a counselor. Did you counsel believers and also unbelievers?
Yeah, I did. And the most memorable... It was so weird because I worked with a female, young adult female one time who was having problems cutting. And she was a, I don't know, young teenager. And her family came to me specifically and they were like, yeah, we really want you to do it. And this was at our church, and we had, women that did counseling, and we had people, but they were like, we really want you to do this. And I was like, yeah, okay. And so we worked on it, and I work with a couple licensed professional counselors that help me with pastoral counseling if I have stuff that's beyond my reach. And, I always want to bring in someone else and talk to them about things. And, later on, this particular, girl, her whole family just went atheist. It was just kind of the strangest thing. I mean, they just did. I mean, they just all swerved that direction. The father went, and him and I had been really good friends, and they just went that direction. And she called me up one time, and she was 16, and there was a thing going on with her. She was sexually active, and she was like, yeah, I had this, we saw this show, and it made me really uncomfortable. And now, when my boyfriend and I are getting busy, I feel, this or that. And she said, can you do some counseling with me without making it about Christianity? And I told her, I was like, well, first off, I'm a pastoral counselor, so you got to take that into consideration. And I said, but I will do everything I can to give you the best counseling that I can without Bible thumping. How's that? And she was like, okay. So I worked with her some, and we were actually doing this through email. And so I told her, I said, you got to quit having sex.
Yeah.
I said, if you're having problems in this area and this is bothering you and this and this and this, I said, you're not built for this. You're not made for this. Your brain's not ready for this. Nothing is right about any of this for you that's healthy. None of it. And I didn't bring up God. I didn't say, this is bad and sinful and blah, blah, blah. I just told her, you're 16 years old and you're not ready for this. Yeah. And she wrote back and she was like, this is absolutely the opposite of what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
And the reason why I asked you is because I want to touch on fear today. And so how would you be able to talk about fear to an unbeliever if the opposite of fear is faith. How would you do that? Have you ever had to do that?
Yeah, I've talked to unbelievers about fear, and the human condition lends itself to discussion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
right.
like, well, we all suffer with this. And so when they talk to me about fear, I usually come right out and say, look, I know for me, my relationship with God has strengthened me immensely in the way that I have to deal with fear. I said, for you, you're going to have to basically mitigate risk. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, you need to look at your life and you need to figure out, well, what am I afraid of? What am I really afraid of?
Mm-hmm.
And write it down. And then write down, what's the worst thing that could happen if this thing that I'm afraid of occurs? For some of these people, it's death. And I'm like,
right.
well, get ready for dying then. Settle it in your mind. And that's how it goes with all of it. And most people, because it is a common condition, they can hear that. They can hear you talk about something like that, like losing your job. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to get another job.
Yeah.
Or what if I'm in a car accident and I'm paralyzed? Well, then you're going to be paralyzed. What's the worst that can happen? You're not dead.
Right.
And if they're not believers, and I tell them, I said, well, maybe you'll die. Is that a problem? And they're like, well, no, not really. When you think about these things, it's like I told my wife recently, we had our 28th anniversary and I was talking to her. I said, I realized long ago that I could live, because I've been homeless a few times. Mm-hmm. And I told her, I said, I could live in a single wide trailer out in the boonies with a beater old Cadillac and you and me together, happy as clams. I said, it would be fine with me. I can live in any situation. I said, I just want you there. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's, huge. And for a lot of people that are not believers, their significant relationships, are huge to them. But I also talked to her about the fact that, one of these days, one of us might not be here. There might be some incapacity or, God forbid I should start, losing my mind like an Alzheimer's kind of situation for me. It'd just be horrible. And I said, but I said, we have the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so no matter what happens, we have the Lord. And like Paul said, to live is Christ and to die is gain.
Yeah.
And so I that's how I settle my fear. And for other people that are not believers, I kind of deal with them as potential believers. And so I use our discussion about fear to bring about the knowledge that everyone needs to have, and that is that they have absolutely zero control over their lives. Ultimately, we have no control whatsoever. And so we give ourselves the construct of control. We create boundaries and situations and things that give us a feeling of control. It's kind of like buckling in your vehicle. I buckle in my vehicle. I trust that these little white lines painted on the ground are going to keep stupid people from coming into my lanes and causing me to die. But the fact of the matter is we're all cruising at 70, 75 miles an hour on the interstate, and God knows what is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I've buckled in, I'm listening to the radio or whatever, and I'm feeling safe.
Right.
And, I could have somebody went the wrong way on an off-ramp and bam,
You said that we have no control, but in a sense, we have control to fear. Do you think in that way, sometimes fear is a comfort in a weird sort of way?
Yeah, because I think there's a reflexiveness in human behavior where fear drives us to make choices.
Yeah.
And so that fear drives us to make choices. It's like, someone has a heart attack and all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I got to start living healthy. And it drives them towards making a better choice as it regards their health, And so these things, they're incidents that occur that can be what people like to call wake-up calls, and just make them think smarter, make them behave a little less risky. But what I meant by out of control was an ultimate kind of control. I mean, I can do the speed limit. I can wear my seatbelt. I can be very, very aware, situationally aware of what's going on. I've avoided some serious wrecks. And I'm not trying to make all this about traffic, but it's a great analogy, because we get into this box that we can make go fast and all these other people are in these boxes too, and we're utterly isolated from each other, other than what we can see. And that's how humans are. We build a box, we get in it, we drive it, we move through our lives however we can. And we're either going to be people who help other people. I let people in all the time, for instance. Or we're going to be, I don't know, have you ever studied radioactivity? How radioactive material hurts people?
A little bit, not too much.
It's to me, whether it be divisiveness in the body of Christ, gossip, any kind of sin is like a radioactive little nugget.
Yeah.
And a little piece of radioactive material, it passes through your body because of its density. And it's able to move right through you. And what it does is as it passes through you, it tears apart your cells. It just rips right through them. It's too powerful for your cells to be able to withstand the damage. They can't do it. Now, your body, of course, can. It's like cancer treatment. You know, the whole idea is to kill the cancer before you kill the patient. And so that targeted radioactivity in that sense. But sin is like that, and especially sin in the body. And now that I'm moving more and more into I've always been a pastor. That's one thing I wanted to get at was I was gifted that way very early. I led my youth group. I just, all kinds of experiences that were extremely pastor, you know, and so it's always been something I've done, always something I've felt called to. Mm-hmm. But how that shaped out, you know, it's been interesting. Whew.
Back in the early 90s, for a while, I was having panic attacks. And I don't know why everyone has panic attacks, but for me it was because I knew there were some things that weren't right in my life. And I felt condemnation. And it would manifest itself through panic attacks. And I'm just being honest, right?
Yeah.
So, but why are people having panic attacks? Is it that? Is it a demonstration of what's going on inside of them? Why do you think people, and even Christians, why would they have panic attacks?
I can tell you, I had my very first panic attack, and it was, when I was in the Air Force. I'd probably been in the military for about a year, and I remember that it seemed like it just came out of nowhere. But then I went on to think a lot more about panic attacks and think about what was going on in my life at the time. And what I found was, and you mentioned, a particular, not necessarily specific, but struggling with sin.
Yeah.
And
right.
And what happens is that anything that starts to break up the integrity of the human mind, soul, spirit, anything that threatens that causes it to schism. This is what I have found to be very true, that people keep their secrets, and their secrets put pressure on them. Mm-hmm. And that pressure causes them to diverge into two different kinds of people. And so you're being pulled in two different directions, and you're trying to protect whoever from the bad guy or the person who has the potential to hurt them, and you're trying to be a good guy.
Yeah.
What happens is we get this thing in our mind where we really, really want to be the good guy, but we're the bad guy. We're doing something that is pulling us apart, and it starts really screwing with our personality a lot and the way that we manage our lives and keeping up with it. And the further we go down the road, the further this bifurcation occurs, the more we start splitting, and the greater our anxiety grows. And as our anxiety grows, it's kind of like, you bend something. Jesus said, a smoldering wick I will not put out, and a bruised reed I will not break. But we're like a bruised reed. And every time a stiff wind blows, the bruise is where we start to bend and have that potential for breaking. And that's what happens. And when that pressure comes on us, we start to panic, because it's the only way that we can get things back to status quo. The only way we can get something to level off somehow is to create a state of a condition where it overrides all other things.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it. I think in the Christian life especially, I'll throw something out there that it's just a statistical fact that tons and tons of young men, and even women now more so, struggle with pornography. And now it's just rampant.
Right.
It used to, you had to get into your dad's stash or whatever it was. Now, I mean, you watch TV and it's practically pornographic. So, so young men are dealing with the personality schism that comes with wanting to be an upstanding believer and having problems with lust.
Right.
And so that division causes such a panic because all of a sudden you're around your friends, you're with your people, you're not going to talk about this. I remember when I was growing up and I had problems with pornography, I probably talked to 2 people about the entire thing. Mm-hmm. And somebody else had brought this into my life and it just wrecked me. It was really bad. And I think that was part of that same plot that that Satan had against me, and then these gay dudes and stuff, and so it was one of those things where I would go to church, and I was down at the altar all the time, man, praying, "Dear God, take this from me," and but I wanted it, and so when you've got that problem of where you really want to sin, you want to do it, you want the fulfillment, you want to take the shortcut. And then at the same time, you want to be a good, godly person, and you don't really know how to pull it off. That's where you really start splitting. And I had that problem, and I had to deal with that. And you get up in front of people like I did, because I was in front of a lot of people, growing up, playing music, talking about the Lord, and all those different kinds of things. And it's really hard. And the devil uses that to make us less potent as believers and as evangelists, I guess you could use as a word, because he makes us feel like what we're putting up all over the place is a facade. Right. And then the panic hits if anything cracks the facade. And it also keeps you from intimacy with God, because you're thinking, well, I can't present myself to God like this. I'm a mess. Yeah. So that's true. C.S. Lewis did say something really interesting about that. And I thought, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And he said, all of the sins of the flesh, lust, what are some of the other ones? Anyways, just the sins of it all comes down to wanting something before God wants you to have it. Right. Is something that actually can drive us to God. We can look at that besotted lifestyle and go, oh my God, I can't stand this. I need your help. And we'll be a lot more prone to that, as opposed to pride, which will never, ever, ever let you get close to God. So even though, anybody who hears this and might be thinking about their own struggles in life and what they're dealing with, don't let pride be the one that gets you. If you've got a problem with this kind of sin of the flesh, seek the Lord out. He will help you. There are people that can help you. There's programs at tons of churches that can help you. Right. Don't hide from it. Deal with it, because we're all dealing with it. Right. Well, let me ask you this. Now that you're a pastor, what do you think the church's response to people in fear, but maybe more even in sin, which leads to the fear? In other words, what I see is the world seems to be getting darker. There's a lot more evil, rampant evil, almost in front of us. Like you said, you turn on the television, the programs that are on today weren't on 40 years ago. No. And so what I see the church doing now is they're trying to say people shouldn't sin. They shouldn't sin. They shouldn't sin. They shouldn't sin. And I understand why they're more coming from a more legalistic perspective, I guess you could say, because the world is getting darker. But the solution is Jesus Christ. And so how do we balance that? We want people to come to Jesus and to give him all of themselves so he can transform them. But yet, if we shove this thing down their throat of saying, you're a filthy sinner, how do we bring people to Jesus Christ under that kind of scenario? Well, the reason why people, the Lord leads them to start fellowships and do different things is oftentimes because we've observed something where we look at it and we're like, I think that the Lord wants me to take a different approach on that. And when I look at it, with this fellowship and pastoring, my whole thing is how did Jesus do it? Yeah. Because, I mean, the human condition has not changed from then to now.
Right.
The technology and whatever there, all it does is bring us to sin faster, but I mean, it hasn't changed. And so I look at how did Jesus do it? Mm-hmm. He never ever let anybody off the hook.
Right.
But at the same time, he understood that, like the woman caught in adultery, the woman at the well, even Nicodemus,
Yep.
he came to Jesus and Jesus knew this guy was, stuck. And he said, go and sin no more. And he told Nicodemus, look, unless you're born of the Spirit, you're not one of mine,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's like, when I talk to people today about it, the very first, it's all relational. And that's what a lot of churches can't get right because people are afraid.
Yeah.
They're afraid of getting their hands dirty, and that Jesus hung out with sinners. And he talked to them and he loved them and he treated them like the objects of God's affection. And so for him, having a bad reputation or no reputation, because it says in Scripture, he made himself of no reputation, is a greater thing. And so, you know what? As soon as church becomes about how many people are here, how often are the people that go here still coming here, and how's our budget?
Yeah.
Then you're off the track, and it's like this thing with Mars Hill. I don't know if you followed that at all.
Yes, a little bit.
But this thing has exploded, right? This whole thing is just blown up. The main church, the satellite churches, everything is forfeit now, and the boards and the state, they're trying to figure out how do we divide this up? What do we do with it? What are we going to do? And Mark Driscoll is quoted as saying by one of his staff members, I want to have the largest church in America. And I'm thinking to myself, that doesn't make any sense. Jesus trotted around the countryside with 12 dudes who he spent all his time, poured all his time into trying to walk them through the 3-year process of just getting ready to be baptized in the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Just to get them to start to get the clue. And what did he get out of them? Really what he got out of them was amazement and confession. And Peter kind of spoke for the entire group when he said, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And I recently, one of the guys I'm really good friends with for a long time, he's not a believer. The idea of Christianity was never really brought into his world. And he's bought off on the evolution thing and the Darwinism thing without even thinking about it. He's just like, well, I saw, he's going with what he thinks he saw on TV.
Yeah.
And he knows I'm a believer. He's known it from the moment we met. We were both in the Air Force in Korea. And finally, after, this was 96. So after 18 years, him and I finally had the real serious talk. Because I married him and his wife 6 years ago, I want to say. And she is a believer, and that's why they asked me to do it, because I'm friends with both of them. They were like, we want to do this. And people were like, yeah, but then she's going to be unequally yoked. And I was like, well, or she could continue to commit adultery.
Right.
They're not going to stop being together.
Mm-hmm.
So as a pastor, you're kind of like, oh man, how do I split this? And I looked at it and I thought, what is going to make the person stop sinning? Well, marriage. And so I'm like, okay, well then I can do that. I can get behind that. And then I will continue, because I also knew that if I said, no, I'm sorry, guys, I just can't do it. It ain't right. For a legalistic kind of thing, like I've seen a lot of people do, I would have lost my spot to communicate with my friend.
Yeah.
I would have lost traction in that. So finally, I was at his house. We were visiting him and I was visiting him and his wife. And, we had the God talk.
Mm-hmm.
We finally got down to that. And, I got him this far, because I have the relationship with him that I have. I got him to accept the possibility that there could be a God. I just got him to that point. I moved the football 3 inches.
Yeah.
But as soon as you start cracking that, all of a sudden then God will come into that world. He was amazed because I was talking to him. I said, yeah, the reason I talk about this is because I have a relationship with God. I talk to God and God talks to me. Mm-hmm. And he looks at me, it's like, you sound like you're nuts. That's like schizophrenia. I said, well, a lot of people might say that are coming from your point of view. But I said, I look at your wife, I know that she talks to God too. And she hears from the Lord as well. And he looked over and she's like, what? And he says, you hear from God? She said, oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And now he's surrounded. But see, what I did is I built a relationship. And that's this entire thing that the churches have to do. Yeah. They have to build relationships. And so when someone comes into the congregation from the outside in, what they need to feel and what they need to see is love. Every activity in the church, every process, everything they do has to be so inundated with love, like Christ-like love.
Right.
That they're not scared. They're not run off. They don't worry about what they wore. They don't worry about anything. And you can stand in front of this person and say, I love you so much that I'm willing to tell you the truth about who you are. You need Jesus. Why? Because you're a sinner and you're separated from God and will be forever if you don't change it. But because we love you, we want to tell you this. But we'll also, if you need it, we'll give you some food. If you need it, we'll get you some clothes. If you need it, like Jesus said, water in prison, in the hospital, all these things. And he said, if you've done it, do these things. You've done it unto me. And so as we've started this fellowship here in my town, Gallatin, our emphasis has been, how do we build a church that can be very benevolent? I know from being extremely poor and, like I said, homeless a few times and coming up against a lot of hard times, living out of the food closet at church and the clothes closet at church, I want to have a ministry that's very benevolent.
Yeah.
That's why we are trying to help Pastor Simon Peter in India, because he's doing that where he is at, and he has no support. Indians, the natives there, they are not going to give him anything. Because they don't believe it. They don't like Jesus. They don't like the concept.
Yeah.
And so, because believing in Christ in that environment totally shatters the entire social construct. See, over here in America, we can believe in Jesus without it rattling all our cages.
Right.
I mean, it ought to rattle all our cages, but, we can get by.
Yeah.
But over there,
It's interesting to think about Jesus when he was walking physically on the earth, and you look at him in the New Testament, and here he was, and the people that were around him were compelled by him. They weren't repelled by him. They weren't, they obviously knew that he wasn't telling them it's okay to sin all you want, that type of thing, but they were compelled by him. So he had some kind of an attraction there that caused people to want to know him. Now, obviously it wasn't the religious, the proud. You talked about pride earlier. It was those who would say, Jesus, can you help me? Can you heal me? And when we think of sinners, we think of people who are unclean. Well, the lepers, they would have to tell people, unclean, unclean. But Jesus actually touched the lepers and he healed them. So this is the church as it should be today. We're not telling people to sin, but we're telling them that they can come as they are and let Christ transform their lives. Because if it's a work of them struggling and trying to change themselves, they're going to fail, because we all fail trying to do it in and of ourselves.
Yeah.
We need Jesus Christ.
I got a friend. He is just an awesome guy, and he's been a believer forever. He's everybody's younger than I am, but he was in the military for a stint and took up smoking. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I met him and I smelled his breath, and I knew that was a problem for him. And that's how I saw it. I was his pastor at the time, because he was only coming to the class on Wednesday nights. And so all the care that he was going to get was going to come through me. Yeah. All the church love and all the church, everything the church can be was going to come through me and the people that were in my class with me. And I realized that he had this issue. And so I started praying for him, because I thought to myself, I bet you if he could not smoke, he would quit.
Yeah.
I really do. I bet you if he could not smoke, he'd quit doing it. And so, Paul said all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial.
Right.
And so I'm not going to go up to him and go, oh man, dude, you're on thin ice, brother. If you don't stop smoking, I don't know if we can hang out.
Yeah.
It sounds stupid, right?
Right.
I was in the military with tons of guys. Everybody in the military smokes. More people smoke in the military probably than they do in on average than just America, and it's stressful. It's easy to do and easy to fall into. And me, I'm just too much of a skinflint. I wouldn't shell out the money for cigarettes. It just,
yeah.
And so I just looked at that and I was like, okay, I can have pizza or cigarettes. Pfft, I'm having pizza.
Right. Me
and
too.
So, so I saw him recently and I went over to his house for something and we were hanging out. And he had bought one of those one of those vapor things just to get what he needed into his system to keep him from wanting to kill somebody. Because quitting smoking is like one of the hardest things in the whole world to do. And so he was taking steps to manage his problem. He was taking steps to get right. Because I know in his own heart that that's what he wants to do. And so I'm like, okay, a lot of the people that are going to come to church, I'll tell you what, they're going to sort them. When we actually eventually, whenever it is, end up in a building and we're a little more institutional than we are right now, which is meeting in my living room and, a little bit more freewheeling. There's going to come a time when people are going to want to institutionalize rules. You're going to be like, well, you can't do that. If someone's out smoking in my parking lot, but they came in to hear me preach,
yeah,
bless God.
Right. And
it's like, I know people have problems. There's some things that are just flat out illegal and you can't do them. As ministers of the gospel, which every believer is, we have to strive as much as we can through the Holy Spirit, by the power of the Holy Spirit, to be as much like Christ as possible.
Yes.
And that means that we're going to be magnets for sinners.
Right. As Jesus was.
Exactly. They're not going to feel the condemnation. They might feel conviction, which is a whole different thing, but they're not going to feel the condemnation. Because I'm not interested in running anybody off that doesn't fit my picture. I have to protect my church. I have to keep it healthy. I have to intervene in things. And so, as the pastor, I'm going to be in the midst of the mess, and I'm supposed to be the one that is spending time learning how to deal with this and dealing with it. And I've done that a ton in counseling. And in counseling, you always see process. It's always process. Okay, we're at step 1. We're gonna move to step 10, but we're gonna do that by getting through 2, 3, 4, 5, blah 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 blah. And you just gauge that process and you look at that. And that's how you reach people. You love them. You be a loving person no matter what.
When Jesus healed many of those people, I'm sure there were people that weren't, by our standards, living right or even God's standards, but he healed everyone. Now, it seems to me that through that healing and through his love, it probably transformed many of those people, even though we don't hear about those people after their healing. So in other words, Jesus did love them. He healed them. He wanted to make things right. But that probably impacted, we would assume, many of their lives, that kind of love that this Savior said, yes, I'll heal you. Maybe you've been rejected all of your life, but I'm willing to do that for you. So it seems to me that maybe that love not only healed them physically, but we may be looking at many who were healed spiritually too because of love.
Well, the spiritual healing is the more important one.
Right.
And that's, I think, what Jesus offered people in that region, when he was doing his ministry on earth, and a real small patch of ground, honestly.
Yeah.
He was able to show people that they could get to God. And ultimately, that's what we want. We want the relationship with God, and we want to be able to get in his presence and talk to him as our Father. And, I think of little kids that hide from dad when they've done something wrong,
Yeah.
They know it. He knows it. And so God will not be mocked. And he is the ruler of the universe. He is the all-powerful, almighty, all-knowing, all-good, omnibenevolent, all of it, all of the perfections of all of the good qualities. And you look at it and you're like, I need to respect this guy. It's basically a way of putting away your pride.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to look at this guy and say, oh, you're not the boss of me. That's what unbelievers do. Unbelievers that are in any way ever in their life challenged with the reality of God and are like, nah. I was talking to God about my diet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been talking to God about my diet a lot because I'm overweight. And it was like, you know, I would give it lip service and I'd be like, yeah, this is serious. You know, in my head, I would be like, yeah, this is serious and stuff. And then, you know, I'd eat what I want. And I remember I was praying to the Lord and I was like, you know, I was thinking to myself, when am I going to take myself seriously on this one? And God just very clearly said to me, when are you going to take me seriously on this one?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm not. I'm treating him with a kind of disregard because he's made it perfectly clear that you're not supposed to be a slave to anything.
Right.
And I'm a slave to donuts and chocolatey things and stuff. And to the point where I don't have the self-control I'm supposed to have. And that's a mark of a mature Christian.
Right.
And so it's like, oh my gosh, I really need to get this together because I love God and I want to be able to do more for him. I don't want anything to inhibit my ability to minister.
Absolutely.
And see, and when Christians will live for everyone else but themselves, that's when things will change. That's when the church will change. That's when all these different things will change. Is when we're not in the relationship with God for the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get to heaven. I'll get whatever he's got planned for me. I don't care about that now. You know, Paul's sitting in chains in the worst possible prison conditions you can think of.
Right.
And he's like, hey, you know what? These chains further the gospel. When people, believers, will completely stop living for themselves and start living for Christ, for the lives of other people, for other people, so they can grow, you know, so that they can do things in faith, then the church will change. But as long as churches continue to try to look like something that is not Christ, it won't happen.
Right. You know, Jesus said, "Don't worry about your life, what you eat, what you wear, you know, and so don't worry about these things." But from a Christian perspective, sometimes we do. Should we recognize these worries as a spiritual attack?
I would not say spiritual attack. I would say spiritual shortcoming.
Uh-huh.
But you have to understand what he was getting at. What he was trying to get people to do was to think about God first and understand that everything comes from God. It says in James, every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, in whom there is no shadow of turning. And so you're thinking about it. You're like, okay, every good thing that happens to me is coming from the Lord. That's my food, that's my shelter, that's my water, that's my this, that's my that.
Yeah.
You know, and James wrote that. It was the first New Testament book written in like 34 AD. And, is that right? Yeah, maybe it was later than that. But anyways, but he was trying to get them to understand, look, everything that you have comes from God. Mm-hmm. Every good thing. And so when Jesus said, don't worry about this stuff, it was because they were worrying about it. And it was important to them. It was more important to them than their relationship with God. And that's what Jesus is driving at. Let nothing, it's just like the Ten Commandments. You know, it says, have no other gods before me. You know, and that's it. He's just like, don't have anything in front of me. I come first in all things. I am preeminent. And that's because he's God and he is preeminent. And we're fools to think that we can put anything else in that place. So if we think that we're going to forward our own personal agenda, whether it be, do people accept me? Do people like me? Whatever it is, by the shoes that we wear, or keeping up with the fashion, or having a hipster mustache. The hipsters, if anybody hears it, they'll be mad at me. But whatever it is, if I am wrapped up in this world and God is not first, I'm going to just choke the life out of myself. Yeah. And that's how Jesus talked about in the parable of the four soils.
Right. And also too, when we're worrying, that's fear. And so he wants us to have faith in him. He wants us to trust him that he'll take care of us.
Yeah.
Which is not easy always, but when if you've lost your job and maybe your unemployment benefits are running out, that sometimes those kinds of things drag on you, but he still wants you to believe in him and trust that he's going to take care of that.
The thing is that we have to ask ourselves, how little can I live on?
Yeah.
Just what do I really need? Because every month or so, I go down to the Nashville Rescue Mission. Mm-hmm. We have one of the best rescue missions in the country.
I've heard about it, yeah.
And, there's 425 guys, and I've gone down there and I've preached to these dudes, and I've been homeless, so I know what that's like. Mm-hmm. And when I talk to them about being mature believers, accepting the grace of God, and walking the life of Christ out in their lives. And it doesn't matter the circumstances, the fact that they own maybe, 4 pairs of socks tops, maybe 2. Yeah. And some beat up shoes and some this, none of that stuff matters. Jesus said that, there's these impoverished people who have nothing and the world was not worthy of them. The people that can live with nothing but still stay faithful to God are prized. Mm-hmm. And so we really should ask ourselves, what can we go without? What will I allow myself to lose for the gospel? Because it says those who lose their lives will find it.
Right.
And so we have to be willing to go all the way to the mat, all the way down, if that's what furthers the gospel.
Absolutely. Hey, can I throw one thing in there? And you were talking about losing weight, and so I have a little bit of a different take, but I'm not saying that you're wrong and that I'm right or anything like that. It's just a different perspective. Now, you were saying, God convicted you to eat less and all of that. And I agree with that. But there's also another component to that, and I think it has to do with faith in that, for instance, I'm trying to lose weight too, and I've been successful so far, but one of the things that I try to do is I try to see myself as needing God to do that. So I look at myself as I'm a weak person. Without Jesus Christ, I would be nothing. And everything that I do that you see that's good in me comes from Him. In other words, He's the vine, I'm the branch. I believe that the fruit comes through the branch from the vine. Obviously, you have to be receptive to that. But all the glory goes to God, not to me. So when I start a diet or something like that, yeah, I think I should meet Him, in that and work on that. I think that's all good. But ultimately, I always invite Him to be part of that, to say, God, I can't necessarily lose the weight without you. I need your help. I need you to take away some of or my ability at least to overcome the temptations when they come and all of that. And I think that's what you're saying, but maybe the perspective, mine is a little bit different than yours, but do you agree with what I'm saying?
I do. I definitely, for me to overcome. See, I stress eat, and I know I stress eat.
Right.
And I also eat because I like to eat, and it's a comforting thing. And it's, for me, it's like, okay, I need to be able to get up in front of groups for an extended period of time and walk around and talk to them. I need to be able to be agile and physically capable of moving around and doing things in order to be the most effective minister that I can. And I see my health situation that I have chosen for myself.
Yeah.
I didn't choose to be bipolar. I didn't choose, some other things. But there are things I have chosen for myself, and I chose them for, earthly reasons and to bring comfort to myself. And so when I look at it, and this is just for me. It's not necessarily this way for anybody else. I look at it completely from a ministry point of view. It's like, what can I do to continue to expand my capacity for ministry? And I realize that what I have done to myself in my misappropriation of comfort from food is I have hampered my ability to minister. And I don't want anything to get in the way of that. And so I seek God out in dealing with why I eat the way I eat. Mm-hmm. And He doesn't want me to be tripping on it so that I won't talk to people.
Right.
He doesn't want me to feel horrible about it so that I won't get up in front of folks because I feel like, I look horrible and they're not going to want to talk to me.
There you go.
I don't, right. It's nothing like that.
Right.
It's nothing like that at all. It's just, I know inside I want to be able to do more, and to be able to do more means I need to be in better shape.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, the condemnation that comes from that does no good. And,
right.
And as you and I know, he doesn't want us to be condemned from that. He wants us to be transformed from that. So
right.
what I always do is, I seek the Lord for strength in everything. And that's helped me a lot, actually, to get out of fear. And not that I don't experience fear. I do at times, but what has helped me over the last several years is just saying to the mountain, I can't move this mountain on my own. I need the Lord. And in my weakness, He's made strong. So,
right.
And that actually builds faith upon faith, because if you look back and you say, look, I had that problem and God met me and healed that or transformed me. I'm not perfect today by any means, but I'm not who I used to be, thank God. So it's a dependence on Him. And the more we find out we can depend on Him, the more we realize how much He cares about us and wants to help us.
Right.
And so it's the opposite of, turning your face away from God because you feel like He's disappointed in you or He's angry with you, when you can turn to Him and say, this is all yours. It was all done at the cross.
Right.
And we really have nothing to give Him that's worthy of our salvation except for our heart. So Mark, in closing, tell us a little bit about your music, and then we're going to play a song. Maybe tell us about this song, and if there's a way that people can get your music or have access to it, let us know.
Okay. Well, this particular tune is called Everlasting Light, and it's based on that verse from James about God. What's happened is the Lord, I've been doing music forever. I've written all kinds of different stuff, and have had stuff out in the marketplace, and like I said, traveled around and done concerts and ministry. And recently, the Lord has made this, kind of gifted me with worship music.
So where do they find you?
Okay. Right now, the music is not out. I'm going through the process of the copyright and the registration and everything that's going on. If you want to hear one of the instrumentals that I've done, acoustic, that's like going to be on the record in the form that you'll hear it. It's on YouTube, and it's my name, Mark Breton, and the name of the song is The Artist. Okay. So if you go out there to YouTube, you can catch that. If you want to hear other stuff that I'm doing just for fun, I've got 3 or 4 videos up on Facebook where I will have a song fairly well done, and these are the rock tunes.
So Mark Breton, that's Breton, and again, he's on Facebook, Mark Breton. Mark, I know you got to go, but thank you so much for joining us, and we will have you back.
Oh, excellent.
Morning brings your mercy, your faithfulness to me. New every day. Morning brings your mercy, your faithfulness to me. New every day. Evening brings your